Introduction to the Second Edition, 1941. There is what may perhaps be called the method of optimism, which leads us either willfully or instinctively to shut our eyes to the possibility of evil. Thus, the optimist who treats a problem in algebra or analytic geometry will say, if he stops to reflect on what he is doing, I know that I have no right to divide by 0, but there are so many other values which the expression by which I am dividing might have that I will assume that the evil one has not thrown a 0 in my denominator this time. Maxime Boucher. Footnote to her Congress of Arts and Science, St. Louis, 1904, Volume 1, page 472. God may forgive you your sins, but your nervous system won't, old Maxim. When in perplexity, read on, old Maxim. Section A. Recent developments and the founding of the Institute of General Semantics. Science and Sanity, an introduction to Non-Aristotelian Systems and General Semantics, first published in October 1933, was intended to be a textbook showing how, in modern scientific methods, we can find factors of sanity to be tested empirically. Although a great many scientific discoveries have been made since the first publication, it did not seem necessary to revise the text for this second edition because the methodological data given, important for our purpose, have not changed. However, the lists of books in preparation for the Non-Aristotelian library has been revised, and in this introduction I indicate some new developments in general semantics and include a short new bibliography supplementing the bibliography of 619 titles given on page 767. FF. In 1935, I began to conduct seminar courses in general semantics. In 1935, I began to conduct seminar courses in general semantics in schools, colleges, and universities, and before various groups of educators, footnote to that, scientists and physicians, including psychiatrists, footnote to educators. I use the word educator in its standard English sense, merely one who or that which educates. I use educate in the sense of to rear, bring up from childhood, so as to form habits, manners, mental and physical aptitudes, to provide schooling for, train generally, train so as to develop some special aptitude, taste, or disposition, etc. The shorter Oxford English Dictionary on Historical Principles, Oxford at the Clarendon Press, 1933. In this sense, any teacher from nursery school through university professors are educators. From a life point of view, this would include even parents, nurses, etc. In the same year, a group of students of Science and Sanity organized the first American Congress on General Semantics at the Washington College of Education at Ellensburg, where a number of papers from various fields were presented. The present writer delivered 3 addresses on the application of general semantics to education and medicine, which are printed in the Proceedings of the Congress. Footnote to that, distributed by the Institute of General Semantics, Lakeville, Connecticut. The Second American Congress on General Semantics will be held at the University of Denver in August 1941. This Congress is organized by Professor Elwood Murray of the University and M. Kendig, Educational Director of the Institute. In 1938, the Institute of General Semantics was incorporated in Chicago for neuro-linguistic, neuro-epistemologic, scientific research and education. Since that date, as director of the Institute, my major efforts have been concentrated on further research and coordination of rapidly accumulating empirical data, along with the conduct of similar courses to train in the new extensional methods for application in personal adjustment and in the respective fields of the students. At present, several universities are offering accredited courses in general semantics, and in a number of other universities and colleges, general semantics is incorporated in the presentation of other courses. From scientific necessity, this book was written inductively. The seminar courses are presented deductively, and so the two complement each other. The seminars include much illustrative empirical material accumulated in the 5 years of application of the system by my coworkers and myself, together with the pertinent factual newest findings of other sciences. The non-Aristotelian system presented here has turned out to be a strictly empirical science, as predicted, with results which have greatly surpassed even my expectations. General semantics is not any philosophy or psychology or logic in the ordinary sense. It is a new extensional discipline which explains and trains us how to use our nervous systems most efficiently. It is not a medical science, but like bacteriology, it is indispensable for medicine in general, and for psychiatry, mental hygiene, and education in particular. In brief, it is the formulation of a new non-Aristotelian system. Footnote to that. The terms era, epoch, and system will frequently appear here, and to avoid confusion it may be advisable to indicate in what sense these terms are used. Era, a date or an event which begins a new period in the history of anything. An important date, a period marked by the prevalence of some particular state of things, etc. 2. Epoch, a period of history defined by the prevalence of some particular state of things, a period in the history of a process, etc. 3. System, a set or assemblage of things connected, associated, or interdependent, so as to form a complex unity, a whole composed of parts in orderly arrangement according to some scheme or plan, a set of principles, etc., a scheme method, the set of correlated principles or statements belonging to some department of knowledge, a department of knowledge, considered as an organized whole, a comprehensive body of doctrines, conclusions, an organized scheme or plan of action, an orderly or regular method of procedure, a formal, definite, or established scheme or method, systematic form or order, etc., the shorter Oxford English Dictionary on Historical Principles. In brief, it is the formulation of the new non-Aristotelian system of orientation which affects every branch of science and life. The separate issues involved are not entirely new. Their methodological formulation as a system which is workable, teachable, and so elementary that it cannot be applied by children is entirely new. The experience of my co-workers, mostly educators and psychiatrists, and my own, shows that about 90% of those who train themselves seriously in the new extensional methods definitely benefit in various degrees, and in ways so varied as to be unpredictable. Theory and empirical results show that these new methods involve psychosomatic factors which help the balancing and integration of the functions of the nervous system, while the prevalent and traditional intentional methods of evaluation tend to disintegrate these functions. The nervous mechanisms involved work automatically one way or another, harmfully or beneficially, depending on the methods with which we utilize them. This has not been fully realized before. The new methods eliminate or alleviate different semantogenic blockages, many emotional disturbances, including even some neuroses and psychoses, various learning, reading, or speech difficulties, etc., and general maladjustments in professional and or personal lives. These difficulties result to a large extent from the failure to use intelligence adequately so as to bring about proper evaluation. It is well known that many psychosomatic symptoms, such as some heart, digestive, respiratory, and sex disorders, some chronic joint diseases, arthritis, dental caries, migraines, skin diseases, alcoholism, etc., to mention a few, have a semantogenic and therefore neurosemantic and neurolinguistic origin. In general, semantic training, we do not go into the medical angle as such. We eliminate the harmful semantogenic factors, and in most cases, the corresponding symptoms disappear, provided the student is willing to work at himself seriously. Section B. Some difficulties to be surmounted. The attitudes of philosophers, etc. Philosophers, psychologists, logicians, mathematics, etc., are somehow unable to comprehend that their work is the product of the working of their own nervous systems. For most of them, it is only detached verbalism, such as we often find in hospitals for mentally ill. For instance, a very gifted, well-minded mathematician and professor of philosophy wrote to me, "I do not, however, think that neuropsychology is relevant to the analysis of the nature of meaning. I do not believe in confusing logic with neuropsychology." These professionals would be shocked if they would study the many volumes of verbal rationalizations by patients in hospitals. They would find very quickly that the words interplay with the other words somehow, but they have very little, if any, connection with the facts, and that is one reason why the patients are confined. Why speculate on academic verbal definitions instead of investigating facts in such hospitals where patients also pay no attention to the functioning of their own nervous system? Even a gramophone record undergoes some physical changes before words or noises can be stored and or reproduced. Is it so very difficult to understand that the extremely sensitive and highly complex human nervous system also undergoes some electrocolloidal changes before words, evaluations, etc. are stored, produced, or reproduced? In the work of general semantics, we deal with the living neurosemantic and neurolinguistic reactions, not mere detached verbal chatter in the abstract. In our experience, we have found that even seriously maladjusted persons benefit considerably if we can succeed in making them think about themselves in neurological electrocolloidal terms. See Chapter 9. Most philosophers who reviewed this book made particularly shocking performances. Average intelligent readers can understand this book, as they usually have some contact with life. It is not so with those who indulge in mere verbalism. I can give here only a classical example of some philosophical performances. A reviewer in the Journal of Philosophy, February 1st, 1934, writes, "Except for this stimulating discussion of the mathematical infinite," page 206, "and his hints on the nature of theory," page 253, "he contributes nothing to the clarification of meanings by definite analysis of special problems. Indeed, he only adds to the confusion when he declares that hypotheses contrary to the fact are meaningless." Example, page 168. "If his views were correct, science would come to an end. His theory of meaning, like his theory of social causation, is very naive, to say the least. I suggest that the reader verify whether on page 168 there is such a statement or even a hint at such a notion which I could not possibly have. Besides, I do not give any theories of meaning or of social causation. Most philosophers, logicians, and even mathematicians look at this non-Aristotelian system of evaluation as some system of formal non-Aristotelian logic, which is not the case. They are somehow not able to take the natural science point of view that all science, mathematics, logic, philosophy, etc., are the product of the functioning of the human nervous system, involving some sort of internal orientations or evaluations, which are not necessarily formalized. The analysis of such living reactions is the sole object of general semantics as a natural empirical science. These philosophers, etc., seem unaware to give a single example that by teaching and preaching identity, which is empirically non-existent in this world, they are neurologically training future generations in the pathological identifications found in the mentally ill or maladjusted, as explained on page 409 and also in chapter 26. Whatever we may say an object is, it is not, because the statement is verbal and the facts are not. It is pathetic, if not tragic, that society should invest millions of dollars to support such specialists who train future generations in maladjustments just because they disregard the unavoidable neurolinguistic and neurosemantic effects of their teachings on the lives of their pupils. Most scientists and educators are either entirely innocent of these problems or indifferent and passive or even negativistic. Like some animals that can outwit humans because of their keen observations, the cunning, often pathological, thoroughly ignorant present-day totalitarian leaders are not unaware of the academic shortcomings based on inertia, verbalism, etc., and openly proceed to utilize these human nervous weaknesses destructively with very telling results. Nazism, wars of and on nerves, wars of verbal distortion, etc., with their following disasters are, in 1941, only two obvious examples. I will return to this subject at the end of this introduction. The term philosophy, system, etc., as ordinarily used, stand for two broad generalizations. Different philosophies represent nothing but methods of evaluation, which may lead to empirical misevaluation if science and empirical facts are disregarded. Different systems may be very broad and general, such as, say, the Aristotelian system, A, within which is more limited and less general system, such as Christianity, C, within which is, for instance, the Leibnizian system, L, and within some there are individual personal systems, P. Every Smith, 1, has an individual interpretation of broader systems, and so in actuality has a system of his own. As a rule, personal systems are a part of and influenced by larger systems, which in turn are influenced by still more general systems. Such problems can be handled at present only by the method of general semantics and by topological methods. And the footnote to that, Lewin, Kurt, Principles of Topological Psychology, McGraw, Hill, New York, 1936. Mental illness and every form of maladjustments are to be considered as misevaluations involving some philosophies, public or individual, one within the other, as usual. Philosophers, etc., who wish to become aware of such dangers would do well to study the verbalizations and misevaluations of the mentally ill in hospitals. 2. Perplexities and theories of meaning. There is a fundamental confusion between the notion of the older semantics as connected with a theory of verbal meaning and words defined by words, and the present theory of general semantics, where we deal only with neurosemantic and neurolinguistic living reactions of Smith 1, Smith 2, etc., as their reactions to neurosemantic and neurolinguistic environments as environment. The present-day theory of meaning are extremely confused and difficult, ultimately hopeless, and probably harmful to the sanity of the human race. Of late, in the United States, some members of the progressive education movement have written much on reference and operational methods in the abstract, based on verbalism. Let us consider some facts and how the theories of reference and operational methods fit human evaluations. Here is, for instance, Smith number 1, who, through family, social, economic, political, etc. conditions, has become insane. Smith number 1, finally in ordinary parlance Smith number 1, finally, in ordinary parlance, kills Smith number 2. From a human point of view, it is a very complex and tragic situation. Let us account for it in terms of reference and operations. The body and the heart of Smith number 2, the hand of Smith number 1, the knife, etc., are perfectly good reference. The grabbing of the knife by Smith number 1 and plunging it in the heart of Smith number 2, the falling down on the ground by Smith number 2, and the kicking of his legs are perfectly good operations. However, where is human evolution? Where is concern with sanity and insanity? Here we deal with some of the deepest human and social tragedies, which in this case involve not only the killing of Smith number 2 by Smith number 1, but the sick, unhappy, twisted life of Smith number 1, affecting all of his life connections, and with which we must be concerned if we are to be human beings and different from apes. Such an example is of course extreme and oversimplified, although it illustrates the principles. However, officially teaching such methods which are inadequate to handle evaluation and so human values has a definite sinister effect, among others, on the sex life of the students. Many of them are taught to orient themselves generally by reference and operations only, and so mere physiological performance is often identified with mature love life, etc., and is a causative factor in the widespread marital unhappiness, promiscuity, and other lowerings of human cultural and ethical standards. Thus, theories of meaning, or still worse, meaning of meaning, based on reference and operational methods, are thoroughly inadequate to account for human values, yet they do affect the nervous systems of humans. We must therefore work out a theory of evaluation which is based on the optimum electrocolloidal action and reaction of the nervous system. There is no doubt that a civilized society needs some mature morals, ethics, etc. In a general theory of evolution and sanity, we must consider seriously such problems if we are to be sane humans at all. Theory and practice show that healthy, well-balanced people are naturally moral and ethical, unless their educations have twisted their types of evaluations. In general semantics, we do not preach morality or ethics as such, but we train students in consciousness of abstracting, consciousness of the multi-ordinal mechanisms of evaluation, relational orientations, etc., which bring about cortico-thalamic integration, and then, as a result, morality, ethics, awareness of social responsibility, etc., follow automatically. Unfortunately, our education systems are unaware of or even negativistic toward such neurosemantic and neurolinguistic issues. These are sad observations to be made about our present educational systems. May I suggest that readers consult Apes, Men, and Morons, and Why Men Behave Like Apes by Ernest A. Houghton, The Mentality of Apes by W. Kohler, The Social Life of Apes and Monkeys by S. Zuckerman, and many other studies of this kind. They might then more clearly understand how the Aristotelian type of education leads to the humanly harmful, gross, macroscopic, brutalizing, biological, animalistic types of orientations which are shown today to be humanely inadequate. These breed such Führers as different Hitlers, Mussolinis, Stalins, etc., whether in political, financial, industrial, scientific, medical, footnote, see Carroll's Man, The Unknown, medical, educational, or even publishing, etc., fields, fancying that they represent all of the human world. Such delusions must ultimately be destructive to human culture and responsible for the tragic cultural lag stressed so much today by social anthropologists. Existing theories of meaning of any school do not take into consideration that any definition of words by words must be based ultimately on undefined terms. To the best of my knowledge, this problem is not considered at all in present-day educational systems outside of some sciences, and so the existing theories run in a vicious circle, just like a dog chasing his tail, and are bound to be ineffective, if not harmful. As Professor Kaiser aptly formulates the problem, if he contend, as sometimes he will contend, that he has defined all his terms and proved all his propositions, then either he is a performer of logical miracles, or he is an ass. And as you know, logical miracles are impossible. Footnote, Kaiser, Cassius J., Mathematical Philosophy, E. P. Dutton, New York, 1922, page 152. Similarly, the theorists in the theory of meaning, as described above, disregard the inadequacy for human orientation of the subject-predicate form of representation. I must refer the reader to my chapter on relations, page 188, FF, for further information. In principle, a type of orientation which restricts formally everything to subject-predicate forms of representation can account only for symmetrical relations, and we may beat in the bush about meaning. In principle, however, a theory of evaluation is then impossible. Evaluation must be based on asymmetrical relations such as more or less, etc., which cannot be dealt with at all adequately if restricted formally to the subject-predicate forms of representation that harmfully affect our orientations. What I have said here is correct in principle. However, in practice, in the neurosemantic and neurolinguistic development of the white race, we had to invent, by living necessity, some asymmetrical relations, such as more or less, etc. The difficulty lies in the fact that these methods of escape from a subject-predicate grammatical structure of language were used only haphazardly and not formulated generally into a workable system based on asymmetrical relations, which would be teachable. Similarly, with the problem of intentional orientation by verbal definitions and extensional orientation by facts, see page 173, there's also confusion about it. Pure extension is humanly impossible. Pure intention is possible, and is often found in hospitals for mentally ill and in some chairs of philosophy. These issues and problems are seriously confusing to the average person because they have not been formulated before in a methodological system. 3. Inadequacy of forms of representation and their structural revision. It is not generally realized what serious difficulties an inadequate, unduly limited form of representation or theory brings about. This is well known in science. Thus, for instance, the Euclidean and Newtonian systems cannot deal successfully with electricity, and so it was imperative to produce non-Euclidean and non-Newtonian systems, which do apply to the submicroscopic electrical levels and also to the macroscopic gross levels. Similarly, in life, the two-valued Aristotelian system could not deal adequately with the electrocolloidal submicroscopic levels of the functioning of our nervous system, on which sanity depends. Thus, the formulation of the present infinitive-valued non-Aristotelian system became also an imperative necessity. I must stress that as the older systems are special limitations of the new, more general non-systems, it would be incorrect to interpret a non-system as an anti-system. Such a non-Aristotelian system is long overdue. It was retarded because of persecution by the Church and other influential bodies. The general belief that Aristotle said the last word, etc., and particularly because of the inherent difficulties of such a revision. The problem of inadequacy in the forms of representation has handicapped science and life a great deal until relatively adequate systems were produced. In life, the situation is much more aggravated, for if our orientations and evaluations are inadequate, our predictability is impaired, and we feel with the poet Haussmann, I, a stranger and afraid, in a world I would never made. If we have a more adequate or proper evaluation, we would have more correct predictability, etc. See page 58, page 750. We would then feel we are not strangers and not afraid in this human mess you and I have made. Another of the main difficulties is that a language or a system of given structure can be somewhat altered from within, but cannot be revised structurally without going outside the former system. For instance, all the attempts to revise the structure of the Euclidean and Newtonian systems from within were ineffective. Those who revised these systems structurally had to go outside these systems first, after which they were able to produce different independent new systems. Only then did an effective evaluation of the former systems become possible. Similarly, the Aristotelian two-valued intentional system can be revised structurally and evaluated properly only by building independently a non-Aristotelian infinite-valued extensional system. This verifies the contention of Bertrand Russell, made in 1922, that there is a possibility that every language has a structure concerning which in the language nothing can be said, but that there may be another language dealing with the structure of the first language and having itself a new structure. To the footnote, Wittgenstein, Ludwig, Tractatus Logica Philosophicus, with an introduction by Bertrand Russell, Harcourt Brace, New York, 1922, page 23. What Russell calls a possibility becomes a fact once a system of different structure is built. Then the issues become clear. Russell limits himself to the structure of a language and disregards the fact that this limitation is artificial, and that any language involves structural assumptions which build up a system of orientations that may be racial, national, personal, etc. Identifications. 4. Identifications and misevaluations. The problem of general identification is a major problem which does not seem to be understood at all even by specialists. Psychiatrists know professionally the tragic consequences of identifications in their patients. But what even psychiatrists do not realize is that identification in daily life are extremely frequent and bring about every kind of difficulties. As a matter of fact, we live in a world in which non-identity is as entirely general as gravitation, and so every identification is bound to be, in some degree, a misevaluation. In a four-dimensional world, where every geometrical point has a date, even an electron at different dates is not identical with itself, because the submicroscopic processes actually going on in this world cannot empirically be stopped, but only transformed. We can, however, through extensional and four-dimensional methods, translate the dynamic into the static and the static into the dynamic, and so establish a similarity of structure between language and facts, which was impossible by Aristotelian method. Unfortunately, even some modern physicists are unable to understand these simple facts. To communicate to my classes what I want to convey to my readers here, the following procedure has been useful. In my seminars, I pick a young woman, student, and prearrange with her a demonstration about which the class knows nothing. During the lecture, she is called to the platform, and I hand her a box of matches, which she takes carelessly and drops on the desk. That is the only crime she committed. Then I begin to call her names, etc., with a display of anger, waving my fists in front of her face, and finally, with a big gesture, I slap her face gently. Seeing this slap, as a rule, 90% of students recoil and shiver. 10% show no overt reactions. The latter have seen what they have seen, but they delayed their evaluations. Then I explained to the student that their recoil and shiver was an organismal evaluation, very harmful in principle because they identified the seen facts with their judgments, creeds, dogmas, etc. Thus their reactions were entirely unjustified, as what they have seen turned out to be merely a scientific demonstration of the mechanism of identification, which identification I expected. Such identifications are very common. The late Dr. Joshua Rosette, formerly professor of neurology in Columbia University and scientific director, Brain Research Foundation, New York, gives an example from his own experience. A vivid picture on the cinema screen represented a boy and a girl pulling down hay from a stack of bedding. I sneezed from the dust of the hay shown on the screen. Footnote: Rosette Joshua, The Mechanism of Thought, Imagery, and Hallucination, Columbia University Press, New York, 1939, page 212. The problem of identification in values is neurologically strictly connected with the pathological reversal of the natural order of evaluation, which is found in different degrees in the maladjusted neurotics, psychotics, and even in some normal persons. Thus, the supposedly innocent shiver and the sneezing in the examples above, or the attack of hay fever when paper roses are shown, see page 128, etc., may as well, in other cases, end in a sudden death or in a neuroses or psychoses. The neurological mechanisms are similar, involving identifications in values of different orders of abstractions, and therefore the very common reversal of the natural order of evaluation. In the evolution of the human race and language, there was a natural order of evaluation established, namely, the life facts came first and labels, words, next in importance. Today, from childhood up, we inculcate words and language first, and the facts they represent come next in value, another pathologically reversed order by which we are consciously being trained to identify words with facts. Even in medicine, we much too often evaluate by the definitions of diseases instead of dealing with an individual sick patient whose illness seldom fits textbook definitions. The foregoing considerations deal directly with Aristotelian orientations by intention or verbal definitions, where verbiage comes first in importance and facts next. By non-Aristotelian methods, we train in the natural order, namely that first-order empirical facts are more important than definitions or verbiage. It should be noticed that the average child is born extensional and then his evaluations are distorted as the result of intentional training by parents, teachers, etc., who are unaware of the heavy neurological consequences. These are key problems involved in the passing from Aristotelian to non-Aristotelian orientations, which affect our future personal, national, and international adjustments. For a detailed discussion, the reader is referred to this text. See index under the terms identification, order, natural order, etc. Five, methods of the magician. Another very serious difficulty arises due to the fact that our knowledge of the world and ourselves involves unavoidable factors of deception and self-deception. A scientific study of magic with its methods of psychological deception is most revealing, as it shows the mechanisms by which we are continually and unknowingly being deceived in science and daily life. Footnote, Kelly Douglas M. Conjuring as an Asset to Occupational Therapy. Occupational Therapy and Rehabilitation, Volume 19, Number 2, April 1940. The stock and trade of the magician to fool the public consists of methods of misdirection, of misevaluation, half-truths, etc., used to play on the ordinary associations and implications, habits of hasty generalizations, etc., of the audience, thus leading to misinterpretations, identifications, lack of predictability, etc. These general and so common psychological mechanisms are very deep, and to a large extent are connected with the Aristotelian type of intentional subject-predicate orientations, which ultimately may become harmful. For maximum adjustment, and therefore sanity, we need neurological methods to prevent and counteract these heretofore unavoidable old deceptions and self-deceptions. In a non-Aristotelian system, these difficulties are recognized and empirical methods are discovered to eliminate them step by step. Such methods of prevention and counteraction culminate in training in consciousness of abstracting. See chapters 26, 27, and 29, and page 499. I must stress that as far as we humans are concerned, we cannot possibly be entirely ignorant about ourselves. We may have only false knowledge or half-truths. It is psychiatrically known that in many instances, false knowledge, particularly about ourselves, breeds maladjustments, often of a serious character, just because it is based fundamentally on self-deception. In the meantime, we react and act as if our half-truths or false knowledge were all there is to be known. Thus, we are bound to be bewildered, confused, obsessed with fears, etc., because of mistakes due to our misevaluations, when we orient ourselves by verbal structures which do not fit facts. Section C, Revolutions and Evolutions. One of the gravest difficulties facing the world today is passing from one historical era to another. Such passings, as history shows, have always been painful and pregnant with consequences. To illustrate, the transition from papal control to non-papal control, passing through murderous religious persecutions and slaughters, including the devastating 30 Years' War, etc., from French royalism to republicanism, passing through the ferocious French Revolution and Commune, from Tsarism to state capitalism, passing through the latest bloody Russian Revolution and a period of so-called communism. Now, we are witnessing the struggles of democracies with totalitarian states, passing as yet through the recent ruthless Spanish War, Second World War, etc., etc. Similarly, we can give illustrations of painful transitions from one system to another from the history of science, which were also accompanied by bewilderment and labor. For instance, the passing from the Ptolemaic to the Copernican, from Euclidean to non-Euclidean, Newtonian to non-Newtonian, Einsteinian, etc. systems. In all these transitions, it took one or more generations before the upheaval subsided and an adjustment was made to the new conditions. No matter how painful and disturbing these transitions were, they were still changes and revisions within the then most general intentional Aristotelian system. This system was imposed on the white race by the Church Fathers. Its strength and influence was due to its academically rationalized general verbal formulations, which were set forth in textbooks and thus became teachable. From the beginning, the Aristotelian system as formulated was inadequate, and many attempts at corrections were made. The white race was impressed by the church that Aristotle spake, and there was nothing more to be said. In fact, attempts to revise the system were prohibited, even up to very recent times. Just the same new facts, which would not fit the Aristotelian and church patterns, were accumulating, and so new methods, languages of special structure, etc., were required. Perhaps an illustration from the history of mathematics will help. For more than 2,000 years, by necessity, mathematicians differentiated and integrated in some clumsy fashion in order to solve individual problems, but only after the formulation of a general theory by Newton and by Leibniz did the general method become teachable and communicable as a general practical discipline. See page 574, which provided the foundations for future development in mathematics. The Aristotelian system had been formulated in a very rationalized way. Non-Aristotelian attempts have been and are being made continually in limited areas. The difficulty was that no methodological general theory based on the new developments of life and science had been formulated until general semantics and a general extensional, teachable, and communicable non-Aristotelian system was produced. The main difficulties ahead are neurosemantic and neurolinguistic, because for more than 2,000 years our nervous system have been canalized in the inadequate, intentional, often delusional Aristotelian orientations, which are reflected even in the structure of the language we habitually use. It may be helpful to indicate some historical facts of the development of our orientations since Socrates, 469–399 BC. Socrates was the son of a sculptor and himself did some work with the chisel and his hands. He became an important founder of a school of philosophy. In brief, this school had very high standards for science, seeking the application of the science of the time to life so that it became what may be called a school of wisdom. One of the students, Plato, 427–347 BC, who came from an aristocratic family, became the founder of a different school called the Academy, and the father of what may be called mathematical philosophy. Unlike his teacher, he began in his doctrine of ideas to verbally split humans into body and mind, as if they could be so split in living beings. He built a system of immaterialism, or idealism. Aristotle, 384–320 BC, the son of a physician, was the student of Plato, and particularly interested in biology, other natural sciences, etc. He founded the most influential of the three schools, which is called by his name. He was undoubtedly one of the most gifted men mankind has ever known. As usual in such cases, the study of one branch of knowledge leads to another, so Aristotle was led to the study of logic, linguistic structure, etc., about which he produced scholarly treatises or textbooks, ultimately formulating the most complete system of his time. Because of the completeness of the system, backed by powerful influences, it has molded our orientations and evaluations up to the present. The man on the street, our education, medicine, and even sciences are still in the clutches of the system of Aristotle, a system inadequate for 1941, yet perhaps satisfactory 2,300 years ago, when conditions of life were relatively so simple, when orientations were on the macroscopic level only, and knowledge of scientific facts was practically nil. See page 371. In Aristotle's system, as applied, the split becomes complete and institutionalized, with jails for the animal and churches for the soul. Now we begin to realize how pernicious and retarding for civilization that split is. For instance, only since Einstein and Minkowski do we begin to understand that space and time cannot be split empirically. Otherwise, we create for ourselves delusional worlds. Only since their work has modern submicroscopic physics, with all its accomplishments, become possible. Similarly and tragically, this applies to medicine. Until recently, we have had a split medicine. Our branch, general medicine, was interested in the body, soma. The other was interested in the soul, psyche. The net result was that general medicine was glorified form of veterinary science, while psychiatry remained metaphysical. Footnote: Korzybski, Alfred, Neurosemantic and Neurolinguistic Mechanisms of Extensionalization, American Journal of Psychiatry, Volume 93, Number 1, July 1936. However, it has been found empirically that a great many physical ailments are of a semantogenic origin. Only a few years ago, general physicians began to understand that they cannot deal with humans without knowing some understanding that they cannot. Only a few years ago, general physicians began to understand that they cannot deal with humans without knowing something about psychiatry, and psychosomatic medicine began to be formulated. I cannot go into further detail here, except to mention that this is another constructive step away from the Aristotelian system, which as applied trains us in artificial verbal splits. If we train in methods which in principle lead to splitting the personality, we obviously train or prepare the ground for dementia praecox or schizophrenia, which very often involves a split personality. At any rate, it does not seem to be advisable for sanity, and so proper evaluation of facts and reality to train our children in delusional methods. Personally, the author is always profoundly shocked that parents who, after all, care for their children can tolerate educators, physicians, scientists, etc., who train their children in such pernicious and hopelessly antiquated methods. I also always wonder whether educators, physicians, scientists, and other professionals realize what harm they can do by disregarding factors of sanity or by ignoring them. It is pitiful to watch how even some of the most outstanding scientists in the world are unable to understand what a passing from one system to another means. Thus, for example, an encyclopedia of unified science was projected. A number of very scholarly treatises were published in it, and yet, because the difficulties were not faced squarely, the authors are missing the point that neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms are involved, and that we are passing from one system to another. One of the tremendous obstacles in the revision of the Aristotelian system is exactly the excellence of the work of Aristotle, based on the very few scientific facts known 2,300 years ago. The aim of his work, circa 350 BC, was to formulate the essential nature of science, 350 BC, and the forms and laws of science. His immediate goal was entirely methodological, 350 BC, and he aimed to formulate a general method for all scientific work. He was even expounding the theory of symmetrical relations, the relation of the general to the particular, etc. In his days, these orientations were by necessity too valued and objective. Hence follows his system in his follows his system. I don't know a word. There's a section of the page taken out. Okay. I'll start the sentence over. In his days, these orientations were by necessity too valued and objective. Hence follows his whole system even more or less satisfactory on macroscopic levels. A modern revision of the Aristotelian system or the building of a non-Aristotelian system involves or is based on similar aims, namely the formulation of a general method not only for scientific work but also life as we know it today. 1941. Modern scientific developments show that what we label objects or objective are mere nervous constructs inside of our own skulls, which our nervous system have abstracted electrocolloidally from the actual world of electronic processes on the sub-microscopic level. And so we have to face a complete methodological department from two valued objective orientations to general infinite valued process orientations, as necessitated by scientific discoveries for at least the past 60 years. The aim of the work of Aristotle and the work of non-Aristotelian is similar, except for the date of our human development and the advance of science. The problem is whether we shall deal with science and scientific methods of 350 BC or of 1941 AC. In general semantics, in building up a non-Aristotelian system, the aims of Aristotle are preserved, yet scientific methods are brought up to date. Section D, a non-Aristotelian revision. In an attempt to convey the magnitude of the task we are now confronting, I can do no better than to summarize roughly in the following tabulation some of the more outstanding points of difference between the Aristotelian system as it shapes our lives today and is lived by, and a scientific non-Aristotelian system as it will perhaps guide our lives sometime in the future. The table has a list of old Aristotelian orientations circa 350 BC, which I will be reading first, and then I will be reading the corresponding new general semantic non-Aristotelian orientations from 1941 AC. 1. Subject-predicate methods. Relational methods. 2. Systematical relations, inadequate for proper evaluation. Asymmetrical relations, indispensable for proper evaluation. 3. Static, objective, permanent, substance, solid matter, etc. orientations. Dynamic, ever-changing, etc. electronic process orientations. 4. Properties of substance, attributes, qualities of matter, etc. Relative invariance of function, dynamic structure, etc. 5. Two-valued, either-or, inflexible, dogmatic orientations. Infinite valued flexibility, degree orientations. 6. Static, finalistic allness, finite number of characteristic attitudes. Dynamic non-allness, infinite number of characteristic attitudes. 7. By definition, absolute sameness, in all respects, identity. Empirical non-identity, a natural law as universal as gravitation. 8. Two-valued certainty, etc. Infinite valued maximum probability. 9. Static absolutism, dynamic relativism. 10. By definition, absolute emptiness, absolute space, etc. Empirical fullness of magnetic gravitational fields, etc. Fields. 11. By definition, absolute time, empirical spacetime. 12. By definition, absolute simultaneity, empirical relative simultaneity. 13. Additive and linear, functional non-linear. 14. 3 plus 1, dimensional space and time. 4-dimensional spacetime. 15. Euclidean, non-Euclidean. 16. Newtonian, Einstein or non-Newtonian. 17. Sense data predominant, inferential data as fundamental new factors. 18. Macroscopic and microscopic levels, sub-microscopic levels. 19. Methods of magic, self-deception. Elimination of self-deception. Fibers, neuron. 20. Fibers, neurons, etc. Objective orientations. Electrocolloidal process orientations. 21. Eventual organism as a whole, disregarding environmental factors. Organism as a whole in environments, introducing new unavoidable factors. 22. Elementalistic structure of language and orientations. Non-elementalistic structure of language and orientations. 23. Emotion and intellect, etc. Semantic reactions. 24. Body and mind, etc. Psychosomatic integration. 25. Tendency to split personality, integrating personality. 26. Handicapping nervous integration, producing automatically thalamocortical integration. 27. Intentional structure of language and orientation, perpetuating. Extensional structure of language and orientations, producing. 28. Identifications in value, A, of electronic, electrocolloidal, etc. stages of processes with the silent, nonverbal objective levels, B, of individuals, situations, etc. C, of orders of abstractions, consciousness of abstracting, extensional devices. 29. Pathologically reversed order of evaluation, natural order of evaluation. 30. Conducive to neurosemantic tension, producing neurosemantic relaxation. 31. Injurious psychosomatic effects, beneficial psychosomatic effects. 32. Influencing toward sanity, influencing toward sanity. 33. Action at a distance, metaphysical false-to-fact orientations. Action by contact, neurophysiological scientific orientations. 34. Two-valued causality and so consequent final causation. Infinite valued causality, where the final causation hypothesis is not needed. 35. Mathematics derived from logic with resulting verbal paradoxes. Logic derived from mathematics, eliminating verbal paradoxes. 36. Avoiding empirical paradoxes, facing empirical paradoxes. 37. Adjusting empirical facts to verbal patterns, adjusting verbal patterns to empirical facts. 38. Primitive static science, religions. Modern dynamic religions, science. 39. Anthropomorphic, non-anthropomorphic. 40. Non-similarity of structure between language and facts, similarity of structure between language and facts. 41. Improper evaluations resulting in proper evaluations tested by. 42. Impaired predictability, maximum predictability. From 43 to 50, the Aristotelian section just says disregarded. However, non-Aristotelian orientations are as follows. 43. Undefined terms. 44. Self-reflexiveness of language. 45. Multi-ordinal mechanisms and terms. 46. Over-under defined character of terms. 47. Inferential terms as terms. 48. Neurolinguistic environments considered as environment. 49. Neurosemantic environments considered as environment. 50. Decisive automatic effects of the structure of language on types of evaluation and so neurosemantic reactions. 51. Back to Aristotelian orientations. Elementalistic verbal intentional meaning, or still worse, meaning of meaning. Non-elementalistic extensional by fact evaluations. 52. Antiquated, modern, 1941. The non-Aristotelian orientations differ as much from the Aristotelian as the Aristotelian differ from the primitive types of evaluation. The old orientations are being perpetuated as a rule unknowingly through the Aristotelian structure of our language, our institutions, etc. The new orientations are simpler than the old because they're closer to empirical facts, and so are even more easily absorbed by children, provided parents, teachers, etc. are themselves aware of the new methods, and so can give the children guidance. The difficulties we are now facing with the many important new factors introduced in a non-Aristotelian system, listed roughly in the tabulation, cannot be evaluated effectively unless we understand the role that new factors play in our generalizations. Section E. New factors, the havoc they play with our generalizations. In mathematics and science, we use extensively the method of interpolation. In building curves, we do not have all the points or data. We have a number of them and then connect the points with a smooth curve. The equation of that curve is given on the basis of the actual data at hand. The nervous process which are involved in interpolations and building up equations are also involved in producing ordinary generalizations in daily life. That is, we interpolate from the data we have and then generalize in words instead of equations. It is well known that sometimes when a new datum is discovered, it transforms the curve entirely, with a corresponding change in the equation generalization. Figure 2, as an illustration, will make this clearer. If we measure the experimental points 1, 0, 3, 6, 5, and 12, we would find them to lie on the line ABC with the equation y equals 3x minus 3. And we might conclude therefrom that further similar experiments would confirm the linearity of the relationship being studied. But if a further analysis yields the point 26, the simplest curve fitting these data is now the curve ad back, expressed by the equation y equals x to the third minus 9x to the second plus 26x minus 18, which is different and much more complex than before, because it is a cubic equation instead of a linear equation. It is not generally recognized what havoc the discovery of a single new important structural factor may play with our generalizations. In science and ordinary life, we are coming across such new factors quite often, and we have to change our equations or generalizations, and so our standards of evaluation, if we do not want to build up delusional situations for ourselves. As an example, I can suggest here the work of Professor W. Burridge, who, in his physiological investigations, introduced the new unavoidable factor of the electrocolloidal structure of life. In this case, it does not matter whether the particular colloidal theory suggested by Burridge is correct or not. The fact that he introduced an important new structural factor leads to entirely different interpretations, generalizations, etc., although the first-order empirical fact remains. Such an introduction requires a complete revision of the generalizations of biology, physiology, neurology, etc., and therefore even medicine and psychiatry. Incidentally, psychosomatic results become at least intelligible. Other examples may be given, such as the work of Professor William F. Peterson, who introduced the new factor of weather into medicine, or of Freud, who introduced the unconscious, etc., or of Lorentz, Einstein, and others who introduced the finite velocity of light into the Newtonian system, etc., etc. As is well known, the introduction of these new factors revolutionized constructively the older theories. The scientific requirements of a new theory are very exacting. A new theory must account for the known facts and predict new facts following the new generalizations, which in turn depend upon the new factors or structural assumptions introduced. The predicted new facts must then be verified empirically. In general semantics, we introduce a number of new unavoidable structural factors. Among others are neurosemantic, neuroevaluational, and neurolinguistic environments as environment. Such introductions also require a radical revision of what we know and have wide applications in daily life, as well as in sciences, including the foundation of mathematics and physics. These new factors should particularly interest parents, educators, medical men, psychiatrists, and other specialists. The introduction of new factors may at first produce seeming difficulties because of the unfamiliarity of the new terminology, which embodies the new structural assumption, and because of the necessity of a recanalization of our neurolinguistic habits, etc. Yet, after the new orientations are acquired, the new issues become much simpler than the older because they are better understood. In at least one historical case, it was the omission of an unnecessary artificial assumption that brought about a transformation of the whole system. I speak here about Euclidean geometry, which assumes the equidistance of parallels, and the non-Euclidean geometries, which eliminated this equidistance postulate as unnecessary. The results were very striking. Thus, in the Euclidean system, we build curves out of little bits of straight lines. We do the opposite in the newer geometries. We start with curves, shortest distance, etc., not straight lines. And so one knows what that means, as no one knows what that means, and build up straight lines as the limit of an arc of a circle with an infinite radius. Further explanations are given in the text, but I hope that I have conveyed to the reader the fundamental character of these problems and some of the difficulties encountered at first when new structural factors are introduced. Even the elimination of a postulate may be translated into an introduction of a new negative factor. This translation is important in life, although it may be unimportant in technical mathematics. In science, as well as in life, we deal all the time with this kind of problems, and when they are not understood structurally, we are only plunged into paradoxes and bewilderment and potential maladjustment. Section F. Non-Aristotelian methods. 1. Neurological mechanisms of extensionalization. There is an especially broad generalization already referred to, which empirically indicates a fundamental difference between the traditional Aristotelian intentional orientations and the new non-Aristotelian extensional orientations, and in many ways summarizes the radical differences between the two systems. This is the problem of intention, spelled with an S, and extension. Aristotle and his followers, even today, recognize the difference between intention and extension. However, they consider the problem in the abstract, never applying it to human living reactions as living reactions, which can be predominantly intentional or predominantly extensional. The interested reader is advised to consult any textbook on logic concerning intention and extension, as well as the material given in this text. The difference can be illustrated briefly by giving examples of definitions. Thus, a definition by intention is given in terms of Aristotelian properties. For instance, we may verbally define man as a featherless biped, rational animal, and whatnot, which really makes no difference because no listing of properties could possibly cover all the characteristics of Smith 1, Smith 2, etc., and their interrelations. By extension, man is defined by exhibiting a class of individuals made up of Smith 1, Smith 2, etc. On the surface, this difference may appear unimportant, not so in living life applications. The deeper problems of neurological mechanisms enter here. If we orient ourselves predominantly by intention or verbal definitions, our orientations depend mostly on the cortical region. If we orient ourselves by extension or facts, this type of orientation by necessity follows the natural order of evaluation and involves thalamic factors, introducing automatically cortically delayed reactions. In other words, orientations by intention tend to train our nervous system in a split between the functions of the cortical and thalamic regions. Orientations by extension involve the integration of corticothalamic functions. Orientations by extension induce an automatic delay of reactions which automatically stimulates the cortical region and regulates and protects the region of the usually overstimulated thalamic region. What was said here is elementary from the point of view of neurology. The difficulty is that this little bit of neurological knowledge is not applied in practice. Neurologists, psychiatrists, etc. have treated these problems in an abstract, academic, detached way only, somehow entirely unaware that living human reaction depends on the working of the human nervous system, from which dependence there is no escape. No wonder philosophers, logicians, mathematicians, etc. disregard the working of their nervous system, if even neurologists and psychiatrists still orient themselves by verbal fictions in the abstract. If we investigate, it seems appalling how little of the vast knowledge we have is actually applied. Even the ancient Persians showed their understanding of the difference between learning and applying in their proverb, "He who learns and yet does not what he knows is one who plows and plows yet never sows." In this new modern non-Aristotelian system, we have not only to know elementary facts of modern science, including neurolinguistic and neurosemantic researches, but also to apply them. In fact, the whole passage from the Aristotelian to non-Aristotelian systems depends on this change of attitude from intention to extension, from macroscopic to submicroscopic orientations, from objective to process orientations, from subject-predicate to relational evaluations, etc. This is a laborious process, and months of self-discipline are required for adults before these new methods can be applied generally. Children, as a rule, have no difficulties. If we stop to reflect, however, it seems obvious that those who are trained in two-valued macroscopic objective Aristotelian orientations only are thoroughly unable to have modern electrocolloidal submicroscopic infinite-valued process orientations in life, which can be acquired only by training in non-Aristotelian methods. It is sad, indeed, to deal with even young scientists in the colloidal and quantum fields who, after taking off their aprons in the laboratory, relapse immediately into the two-valved prevalent Aristotelian orientations, thus ceasing to be scientific. 1941. In many ways, these scientists are worse off than the man on the street because of the artificially accentuated split between their scientific and their life orientations. Although they work in an infinite-valued, non-Aristotelian field, even they need special training to become conscious of how to apply their own scientific non-Aristotelian methods to life problems. Empirically, the consequences of training in the new methods are astonishingly far-reaching. This is easily understood after reflection because the integrating of the functions of the cortical and thalamic regions bring about better functioning of glands, organs, etc. Although general semantics is not a medical science, we can understand why the non-Aristotelian extensional thalamocortical methods bring about a great deal of stabilization and even psychosomatic consequences, as the empirical results achieved by my psychiatric co-workers and myself indicate. 2. Neurosemantic relaxation. The optimum working of the nervous system depends, among other things, on normal blood pressure, which is predominantly a thalamic function, supplying the nervous system with necessary blood circulation. As both affective or emotional responses and blood pressure are neurologically closely connected, it is fundamental for emotional balance to have normal blood pressure and vice versa. In general semantics, we utilize what I call neurosemantic relaxation, which, as attested by physicians, usually brings about normal blood pressure. That is, it lowers abnormally high blood pressure and raises abnormally low pressure, thus regulating the essential blood circulation and so blood supply. The standards for normal are given in statistical averages and are not accurate for the given individual, and at different times. These conditions are beneficial, consequences are strictly empirical, and must be taken into account regardless of the fact that the present scientific theories on the subject are not yet clear. It must be realized that for the normal working of the nervous system, we must have a proper blood circulation, which may be affected by the tension of the blood vessels and is also connected with emotional tension. We are never aware of this particular steady kind of emotional tension, which involves hidden fears, anxieties, uncertainties, frustrations, etc., and through the nervous mechanisms of projection, color harmfully our attitudes toward the world and life in general. Such conditions result in defensiveness, which is no defense but a wasteful, useless drain on the limited nervous capacities. Some details of the mechanisms and techniques involved as they affect, among others, so-called speech difficulties, stuttering, are given by Professor Wendell Johnson, University of Iowa, in his Language and Speech Hygiene, an application of general semantics, published as the first monograph of the Institute of General Semantics. More details concerning neurosemantic relaxation will be presented in professional papers. 3. Extensional devices and some applications. To achieve extensionalization, we utilize what I call extensional devices. 1. Indexes. 2. Dates. 3. Etc. 4. Quotes. 5. Hyphens. 1 through 3 being working devices, 4 through 5 being safety devices. It should be noticed that in our four-dimensional world, dating is only a particular temporal index by which we can deal effectively with space-time. In a non-Aristotelian orientations, these extensional devices should be used habitually and permanently, with a slight motion of the hands to indicate absolute individuals, events, situations, etc., which change at different dates, also different orders of abstraction, etc. Thus, thalamic factors become involved, without which the coveted thalamocortical integration cannot be accomplished. I may add that all existing psychotherapy, no matter of what school, is based on the partial and particular extensionalization of a given patient, depending on the good luck and personal skills of the psychiatrist. Unfortunately, these specialists are in the main unaware of what is said here, and of the existence of a theory of sanity which gives general, simple, and workable thalamocortical methods for extensionalization, and so thalamocortical integration. A few illustrations of the wide practical applications of some of the devices may be given here. In many instances, serious maladjustments follow when hate absorbs the whole of the effective energy of the given individual. In such extreme cases, hate exhausts the limited effective energy. No energy is left for positive feelings, and the picture is often that of dementia, praecox, etc. Thus, an individual hates a generalization, mother, father, etc., and so by identification hates all mothers, all fathers, etc. In fact, hates the whole fabric of human society, and becomes a neurotic or even psychotic. Obviously, it is useless to preach love for those who have hurt and have done the harm. Just the opposite. As a preliminary step, by indexing, we allocate or limit the hate to the individual Smith 1 instead of the hate for a generalization which spreads over the world. In actual cases, we can watch how this allocation or limitation of hate from a generalization to an individual helps the given person. The more they hate the individual Smith 1 instead of a generalization, the more positive, effective energy is liberated, and the more human and normal they become. It is a long struggle, but so far empirically invariably successful, provided the student is willing to work persistently at himself. But even the indexed, individualized hate is not desirable, and we eliminate it rather simply by dating. Obviously, Smith 1, 1920 is not Smith 1, 1940, and most of the time, Hurt 1, 1920 would not be Hurt in 1940. With such types of orientations, the individual becomes adjusted and serious improvements in family and social relationships follow because the student has trained himself in a general method for handling his own problems. Similar mechanisms of generalizations through identifications are involved in morbid and other generalized fears, which are so disastrous for daily adjustment because thalamic factors are involved. These difficulties are helped greatly or eliminated by a similar use of the extensional devices to individualize and then date the allocated fears. What a heavy price we may sometimes pay for the disregard of extensional devices in connection with the structure of language can be illustrated no better than by the life history and work of Dr. Sigmund Freud. In his writings, Freud ascribed one intentional, undifferentiated sex even to infants, which revolted public opinion. If Freud would have used the extensional devices, he would not have gotten into such detrimental professional and other difficulties. He would not have used the fiction sex without indexes, dates, and quotes, and he would have explained that an infant has a ticklish organ which could be labeled sex 0, 0 at birth, sex 1, 1 at the age of 1, sex 2, 2 at the age of 2, etc. These are obviously different in life, but the differences are hidden by the one abstract definitional term sex and made obvious only by the extensional techniques. Let us be frank about it. The intentional abstract sex labels a fiction. By extension or facts, sex varies with every individual, not only with age, dates, but in relation to endless other factors, and can be handled adequately only by the use of extensional devices. 4. Implications of the structure of language. In what is said above, we were already dealing with the change from an intentional to an extensional structure of language, and so orientation. We can investigate a step further and find that the Aristotelian structure of language is in the main elementalistic, implying through structure a split or separation of what in actuality cannot be separated. For instance, we can verbally split body and mind, emotion and intelligence, space and time, etc., which as a matter of fact cannot be separated empirically and can be split only verbally. These elementalistic splitting structural characteristics of language have been firmly rooted in us through the Aristotelian training. It built for us a fictitious, animistic world, not much more advanced than that of the primitives, a world in which, under present conditions, an optimum adjustment is in principle impossible. In a non-Aristotelian system, we do not use elementalistic terminology to represent facts, which are non-elementalistic. We use terms like semantic reactions, psychosomatic, space-time, etc., which eliminate the verbally implied splits and consequent misevaluations. In the beginning, In the beginning, In the beginning of my seminars, when I am explaining space-time, students often react by saying, "Oh, you mean space and time." This translation would abolish the whole modern advances of physics because of the structural implications of a delusional verbal split. Similarly, the habitual use of the non-elementalistic term semantic reactions eliminates metaphysical and verbal speculations on such elementalistic fictions as emotion and intellect, etc., considered as separate entities. Unfortunately, these considerations of structural implications have been entirely disregarded in daily life, even by scientists, often befuddling issues very seriously. Thus, the term concept is widely used, and the users are not conscious that this term has elementalistic implications of mind or intellect taken separately, which then become verbal fictions. The actual facts, however, can be simply expressed with correct structural implications. What is called concept amounts to nothing more than more or less than a verbal formulation, a term which eliminates the false-to-fact implications. Students of general semantics are strongly advised never to use the elementalistic term concept, but the non-elementalistic formulation instead. We could eventually berate and ridicule people for their old neurolinguistic habits, but in our work, we take the neurological attitude and realize the differences of linguistic habits and neurological recanalization. From this point of view, we only face understandingly the inherent difficulties. I can even now hear the reactions of some of my readers. I fully agree with you, and I believe it is a very fine concept, and so it goes. From the above, it becomes obvious that without changing the language itself, which is practically impossible, we can easily change the structure of language to one free from false-to-fact implications. This change is feasible. Another example may make issues clear. Thus, the intentional verbal definition of man or chair, etc., brings to our consciousness similarities, and so to say, drives the differences into the unconscious in a world of processes and non-identity. It follows that no individual object, event, etc. can be the same from one moment to the next, and so individualizing indexes and temporal devices, dates, etc. should be used conjointly. Thus, obviously, Chair 1, 1600 is not the same as Chair 1, 1940, nor is Smith 1, Monday the same as Smith 1, Tuesday. Orientations in such extensional terms bring to our consciousness not only similarities, but also differences. Through training in the consciousness of abstracting, we become aware that characteristics are left out in the process of abstracting by our nervous systems, and so we become conscious of the possibility that new factors may arise at any time, which would necessitate a change in our generalizations. Once more, we can get a bit of wisdom from mathematical method. I believe it was the great mathematician Sylvester who said that in mathematics we look for similarities and differences in similarities, which statement should apply to our whole life orientation. This is made uniquely applicable to life by the new non-Aristotelian extensional structure of language and so orientations. The reader will find in the work the use of certain terms which, although they are standard English words, are not habitually used. The terms used here have been carefully selected and tested, and found to be more similar to the structure of the actual facts. The power of terminology, because of its structural implications, is well known in science, but is entirely disregarded in our daily neurolinguistic habits. It is shocking to realize that even such scholarly Aristotelians as the Jesuits and other devotees are unable or unwilling to comprehend the obvious structural, modern neurosemantic and neurolinguistic facts. When confronted with them, they hide behind a verbal smokescreen of medieval terms such as nominalism, realism, etc., which in modern science are hopelessly antiquated, useless, confusing, and so eventually harmful. Their attitude even today is that all those problems were settled and disposed of by different monks in the Middle Ages. Modern researches reveal that nothing of the sort was settled or disposed of, and that a new up-to-date revision is necessary to eliminate the false knowledge from which present-day tragedies follow automatically. The reader is referred to Encyclopaedia Britannica under such terms as nominalism, realism, and related terms. Section G. Under defined terms. As was explained before, for a revision of a system, we must first get outside of the system. Only after producing a non-Aristotelian extensional system can the Aristotelian intentional structure of our traditional system and language be properly evaluated. Here we introduce a most important technical term which describes a fundamental characteristic of a correct attitude toward language, namely that most terms are over or under defined. They are over-defined, over-limited by intention or verbal definition because of our belief in the definition. and are hopelessly underdefined by extension or facts, which generalizations become merely hypothetical. For instance, the Euclidean parallels with their equal distance are overdefined by intension and underdefined by extension, as equal distance is unnecessary and also is denied by facts. Similarly, the Newtonian equations are overlimited by intension, while underdefined by extension, which includes the necessary finite velocity of a signal, Lorentz-Einstein. From these two examples alone, we may see how heavy the problem is, as the discovery of a new important factor makes it obvious that the most generalizations must be over or under defined, depending upon whether our attitude is intentional or extensional. Unfortunately, only those who have studied psychiatry and or general semantics can fully comprehend the difficulties involved. Different maladjusted neurotics, psychotics, etc. orient themselves by intention most of the time. This means they evaluate by over-definition, just because they believe in their limited verbalisms, and not by extensional facts, which make us conscious of under-definition. To make this fundamental difficulty clearer, I will use a rather trivial illustration. The dictionaries define houses as a building for humans, habitation or occupation, etc. Let us imagine that we build a house. This buying is an extensional activity, usually with some consequences. If we orient ourselves by intention, we are really buying a definition, although we may even inspect the house, which may appear desirable, etc. Then suppose we move into the house with our furniture, and the whole house collapses because termites have destroyed all the wood, leaving only a shell, perhaps satisfying to the eye. Does the verbal definition of the house correspond to the extensional facts? Of course not. It becomes obvious then that, by intention, the term house was overdefined or overlimited, while by extension, or actual facts, it was hopelessly underdefined, as many important characteristics were left out. In no dictionary definition of a house is the possibility of termites mentioned. Philosophers, etc., and philosophizing laymen, if they ever will be able to face facts and verbal paradoxes, will have a merry time arguing back and forth about the above human and neurolinguistic situation, because they know nothing about psychiatry and empirical data of general semantics. Without serious neurolinguistic study, including the philosophical treatises of mentally ill in hospitals, they will not be able to understand why, by intention or belief in verbal definitions, most terms are hopelessly overdefined, while by extension they are hopelessly underdefined. Their analysis of intentional overdefinitions will be extensional by necessity, and they will have great difficulties in realizing the very important facts that we deal for the most part only with over-underdefined terms. I must stress again that this difficulty is not inherent in our language as such, but depends exclusively on our attitude toward the use of language. The ignorance of philosophers, etc., about neurosemantic and neurolinguistic issues is not only appalling but positively harmful to sanity, civilization, and culture. To justify their own existence and civilization, they should have investigated such problems professionally long ago and incorporated them in their work. Even the present world tragedies are one of the results of their intentional, delusional, neurosemantic, and neurolinguistic detachment. Present-day totalitarianisms were built by the dumping on the human nervous system of such terms as communism, Bolshevism, etc., which induced corresponding fearful signal reactions of the ruling classes, resulting in their imbecilic and suicidal behavior. The ruling classes welcomed in many ways the totalitarians as an eventual safeguard of their personal selfish interests. The extensional results are that the dreaded communists and Bolshevists have united with the totalitarians, and today, 1940, the communists are as imperialistic as any czar has ever been. To give another example of over-under defined terms, it may be helpful to cite a paradox formulated by the mathematician Frege in connection with linguistic difficulties underlying mathematical foundations. In a village, there was only one barber who shaved only those who did not shave themselves. The question arises whether the barber shaves himself or not. If we say yes, then he did not shave himself. If we say no, then he shaved himself. In daily life, we deal all the time with such paradoxes, which, if not clarified, result only in bewilderment. The term barber, as a term, since it omits the living human being, is a label for a fiction, because there is no such thing as a barber without a living human being. By extension, the given specialist in shaving Smith 1 is not so simple. He is peppered with complex chain indexes and dates. Thus, Smith 1 may be by profession a barber. Smith 1-2 may be a father. Smith 1-3 may be a member of a village council, and anyway, Smith 1N is a living person who has his own life and personality outside his profession, and ultimately he has to shave himself if he does not want a beard, verbalism or no verbalism. Obviously, the term barber is overdefined and overlimited by intention, and is underdefined by extension. One of my co-workers, commenting on this paradox, suggested that the barber may be a woman and have no beard, or the barber may be a beardless hermaphrodite or eunuch, or the barber may have a full beard. Thus, we have only traditionally assumed in analyzing this old paradox that the barber was a man with a beard which was somehow shaved. The difficulties of this over-under defined terms situation affect not only our daily lives, but our science as well. For example, H2O is by intention or definition overdefined. By extension or in practice, we do not deal with pure H2O, which is only a symbol on paper, because actually unavoidable impurities are always present. Similarly, let us consider blood transfusion. In the beginning, we used the term blood transfusion as overdefined. By extension, it turned out to be underdefined, because different bloods have different characteristics, and often blood of one type killed the patient who had blood of another type. Here I will list a few of the many heavy terms we use in science and daily life, which are the causes of endless verbal bickering and confusion because of our lack of realization of the over-under-defined character depending uniquely on our attitudes. Terms such as variation in biology and anthropology, learning, frustration, education, needs, intelligence, instincts, genius, teacher, leadership, love, hate, fear, sex, man, woman, infantilism, maladjustment, dementia praecox, personality, democracy, totalitarianism, dollar, God, gold, war, peace, aggression, neutral, Jew, number, velocity, etc., can serve as illustrations. Jew. One psychoanalyst suggests ego and superego. Another writes, I could quote you a considerable part of psychoanalytic terms. An epistemologist says, meaning is a forbidden term in my courses. In linguistic, the terms phenome, word, sentence are mazes of confusion. Philosophy is in as bad a situation. Metaphysics is even worse, to quote a prominent anthropologist. Over-under definition is notably common in a field of so-called social anthropology in which students attempt to disregard the human organism and deal with human affairs as discrete phenomena. For example, culture may be technology, morals, philosophy, or a wooden leg, almost vaguely formulated. When some change in the anatomy and physiology of the organism is attributed to environment, the latter term is not broken down into climax, rainfall, food supply, etc. social environment may be arts, industries, law, morals, religion, familial institutions, tradition, etc. The following comment by a mathematician shows the generality of this problem. A term would seem to be extensionally underdefined so long as we cannot in practice exhaust its instances by enumeration. But this much is true of just about every term of the kind traditionally known as general concrete, e.g., house, dime, star, neuron. A journalist suggests, as an example recently come to our attention, I would mention those magic words Monroe Doctrine. Even when Mr. Hull discusses it, as he does as nearly correctly as anyone in the know, he omits some real facts, such as the economic implications of overturning the international status quo in this hemisphere. But when Japan and or Germany, high-order abstractions is used here, refer to Asiatic and or European monodoctrines, the meaning of the original words has been completely metamorphosed through over-under definition. The American accepted meaning includes no actual control of those falling within the doctrine's sphere, whereas Japan and Germany mean an actual hegemony in their respective spheres. The relationship between ours and theirs is therefore a vast confusion of terms. Then consider the incidents growing out of the insults in the international fields. What is an insult? It is usually pure verbalism with great effective characteristics manipulated to sway others as the swearer directs. To bring it into the domestic field, call a Republican. What is that? A New Dealer. Again, what is that? And the fur begins to fly. A leading moving picture executive says that actors have frequent verbal arguments about what is funny. The only thing to do is to try it before an audience. If it makes them laugh, it may be termed funny. If it fails to make them laugh, it is not funny. In the meantime, your audience may tell you that the subject in dispute is neither funny nor not funny. It is merely boring. There is no need to give further examples here, as practically the whole dictionary could be quoted. In my inquiry concerning over-under defined terms in many fields, I got a number of answers which were very fundamental, which I gratefully acknowledge. Some replies were to the effect that I would gladly give you examples such as you ask for, but I do not think I have any that would be new to you, which shows their understanding of my problem. Yet the most extensional answer was given by that brilliant jurist, Dr. Robert M. Hutchins, who sent to me his convocation address of June 1940, with a letter which he has kindly given me permission to quote, as follows: I am afraid you will feel that all the words I use are examples of the errors you are attacking. Here is my last convocation address, with a sample in every line. Such a judgment is profoundly justified whenever language is utilized. This address is a splendid piece of work, and it implies the intuitive recognition of the fundamental neurolinguistic difficulties we are up against. But an intuitive grasp by exceptional persons does not make that recognition teachable in general education. We need crisp general methodological formulations, which will make people aware of the role of the structure of language plays in affecting our types of reactions. For instance, our language may be elementalistic or non-elementalistic, intentional or extensional, in structure, etc. We discover also the fundamental multi-ordinal character of the most important terms we have, the over-under defined character of most of our terms, etc. As the difficulties mentioned here are inherent in our neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms, which control our reactions, the only possible safeguard against the dangers of hopeless bewilderment, fears, anxieties, etc., is the consciousness of the mechanisms. Certainly, philosophers, logicians, psychiatrists, educators, etc., should be aware of these problems and introduce this consciousness even in elementary education and in psychotherapy. The problem of over-under-defined terms is very difficult to explain briefly. It is discussed more fully in two of my papers presented before professional societies. Footnote to that, General Semantics, Monographs number 2, General Semantics, first part, Extensionalization in Mathematics, Mathematical Physics and General Education, 1935, second part, Thalamic Symbolism and Mathematics, 1938, third part, Over-Under Defined Terms, 1939. These were presented before annual meetings of the American Mathematical Society, Institute of General Semantics, Lakeville, Connecticut, and B, General Semantics, Psychiatry, Psychotherapy, and Prevention, presented before the annual meeting of the American Psychiatric Association, 1940. Section H. The passing of the old Aristotelian epoch. Magnet line mentalities. Present-day scientific researches and historical world developments show there is no doubt that the old Aristotelian epoch of human evolution is dying. The terrors and horrors we are witnessing in the East and the West are the deathbed agonies of that passing epoch, and not the beginning of a new system. The changes of historical periods in human development are often accompanied by the disorganization and sometimes acute suffering of mankind, and the price is bound to be paid by one or more generations. I doubt if in the whole of human history there is more accentuated illustration than the tragic and sudden collapse in the summer of 1940 of the French government and army, and eventually of French culture and democracy. The degree of stupidity, treachery, graft, dishonesty, ignorance, and ultimately decadence, etc., the French plutocrats and politicians and so-called intelligentsia displayed is unprecedented, particularly because of the fine historical record the French had had. We test the freshness or deterioration of fishes by smelling the head end, and as we know at the date of this writing, the head ends of the French democracy have a putrid odor. This deterioration affected the French military men, who once were the finest in the world, and so the collapse was complete. I can give no better, no more pitiful, no more shocking illustration of the collapse of the old system. The Maginot Line mentality will become a historical classic and will be applied quite appropriately to other than military fields. It means a thoughtless, self-deceptive, etc. security in antiquated systems as matched against modern methods of 1940. While the French Mariana felt secure from the front and was taken from behind by the German army men who traditionally pay no attention to such details. Dealing with those tragic and painful collapses in civilizations and eventually passing to another spasm of civilization, what interests us most in considering the problems of sanity is the newest psychopathological methods of destroying sanity, not merely the organized orgies of murder, rape, arson, looting, drugging, and destruction under different dictators, mikados, etc. I mention the mikado especially here as a tragic human example of the effect of over-under defined terms, which in life application sway the history of mankind. By definition and or creed, the mikado is supposed to be some sort of a god, etc. By extension or facts, the best we know, he's probably a sort of nice, supposedly educated collegian. He has a wife and makes babies, but he is told about Japanese people, the behavior of Japanese troops in China, etc., only as much as the ruling clique in Japan allows him to know. If he would be allowed to know what his soldiers and so his representatives are actually doing in China with their governmentally organized murder, rape, looting, drugging, etc., I doubt if he, as a nice collegian, would approve it. However, if he would try to do something about it, he probably would be liquidated by the ruling clique. From a historical civilization, human point of view, he must be adjusted, responsible, as the head of his government, for what the ruling clique and the Japanese army do in China in his name. This applies to many other rulers who seldom know what is going on extensionally, because they rely on the use of over-under defined terms in the reports of those who are in actual control. Ignorance in high places cannot humanly be an excuse. Imagine a British Empire tolerating so long a chamberlain in the government, or the endless petty, befuddling, deluding, etc. bickerings of political partisanship, which are good enough to wreck any system of democracy, and practice another over-under defined term. It seems, however, there is at least one point the totalitarian and democratic politicians have in common, best expressed by Kipling. Quote, "Oh, the loot, blooming loot, that's the thing to make the boys get up and shoot. It's the same with the dogs and men. If you'd make 'em come again, clap 'em forward with a loo, 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 loot, whoopee, tear, I'm puppy, loo, 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 loot, loot, loot," unquote. Number 2, wars and on nerves. It was explained already how the introduction of new factors is bound to change our generalization and therefore evaluations. But this somehow is disregarded by the most rulers and politicians who are on the defensive, while those who are on the offensive introduce new psychological factors to confuse the old generalizations as a rule successfully. Politicians, gangsters, military men, etc., without any understanding of these depth of destructiveness to the human nervous system, utilize these methods quite successfully. Magicians have studied these methods professionally, but they utilize them for entertainment, not for destruction. The destructive methods are the basis of the war of nerves, and the war on nerves, etc., to the point of using screaming bombs, verbal distortion, the psychology of deception, etc. These methods can be counteracted only when governments who feel their responsibility not only to the ruling class, but also to the people of the nations, will employ experts in neuropsychiatry, anthropology, general semantics, etc. for guidance if the present world neuroses is to be checked. There are persistent reports that the Nazi government is utilizing a staff of psychological experts for destructive purposes. Other totalitarian governments ape their successfully worked out and tested methods. The democratic governments, in this present fundamental nerve contest, appear a tragic joke of ignorance, inefficiency, etc. In practice, this amounts to betrayal because they fail to recognize the overwhelming importance and vulnerability of the human nervous system and do not utilize such experts in a constructive way. The scream of a bomb, for instance, is much more destructive to the enemy than the destruction of the bomb itself, which may kill a few people at a cost of at least 100,000 per corpse, while the scream alone brings demoralizing terror to hundreds, if not thousands, of people. It is certainly an expertly calculated and efficient war on human nerves. But what can be done if ignorant democratic governments refuse to live up to their duties? Humanity, civilizations, cultures, etc., are ultimately based on the constructive use of neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms present in every one of us. Many pathological Nazi leaders utilize these constructive mechanisms in civilization for destructive selfish purposes. Under experts, they have turned against mankind, the essential assets of mankind. The beginning was mental illness of a few leaders based on hate, fears, revenges, etc. Later, this destructive task was passed on to governmental psychological experts to build up methods to tear down human neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms, quite successfully because of the abysmal ignorance of modern scientific issues exhibited by the political verbalists and enchanters of other nations. One of the most effective of these methods is the use of pathological verbal distortion, such as is found among the mentally ill. For instance, a paranoiac may believe honestly that he is persecuted, become dominated by hate, etc., and ultimately may kill to defend himself. Unfortunately, at present, only psychiatrists familiar with the verbal distortions and rationalizations of patients in hospitals can fully understand these problems. A mentally ill person is not necessarily a genius, but it is well known to psychiatrists that some mentally ill are often very cunning and will outwit any doctor or nurse. At present, the people of the world do not realize that they are being trained in psychopathological uses of their nervous system, and a future generation or two will become semantically crippled because trained in such distortions. The violation through ignorance and or unsanity of the similarity of structure in the map-territory relationship, see page 58 and page 750, and or deliberate professionally planned distortion of it, abolishes predictability, proper evaluation, trust, etc. This results only in breeding fears, anxieties, hates, etc., which disorganize individuals and even nations. There must be a comprehensive and similarity of structure between language and facts, and so consequent thalamocortical integration, if we are to survive as a sane, civilized race. In a few years, history will judge these dying spasms of the Aristotelian system, a system which was the best of its kind 2,300 years ago, as formulated by a great man under the conditions of a very few scientific facts known as that date. It is not so today, 1941. Most of the knowledge of scientific facts and methods of Aristotle are obsolete today, and in the main harmful, like the Maginot Line orientation. By necessity, the Aristotelian system was based on macroscopic or animal sense levels, which even now predominantly guide the masses. It could take into consideration sense data, etc., but cannot deal adequately with 1941 cultural as well as sanity conditions, which, as we know today, are resultants of submicroscopic electrocolloidal processes. In the non-Aristotelian system, we are stressing the difference between the animal reflex, automatic signal reactions, which do not involve thinking, human intelligence, etc., and human symbol reactions, with their flexibility based on conscious evaluations, etc. These differences could hardly be conveyed better than by studying The Rape of the Masses, The Psychology of Totalitarian Propaganda by Dr. Serge Chakotin, Alliance Book Corporation, New York, 1940. A former student of Professor Pavlov, Dr. Chakotin, bases his analysis of totalitarian methods on Pavlov's fundamental research of conditional reactions in dogs. 3. Hitler and psychological factors in his life. The groping dissatisfaction with the old system was so general that only a catalyst was needed to precipitate the crisis. This catalyst was found in the son of Alois Schicklgruber, also spelled Schuckelgruber, who later changed his name to Hitler. There was a history of illegitimacy in the family. Rudolf Olden, in his biography of Hitler, says, Hitler has given the simplest and clearest picture possible of conditions in his father's home. But we have only to look at the facts to see that, far from being simple, the married life of his father was unusual and tempestuous. 3 wives, 7 children, 1 divorce, 1 birth before marriage, 2 shortly after the wedding, 1 wife 14 years older than himself, and another 23 years younger. That is saying a good deal for a customs officer. There were other important circumstances in Adolf Hitler's life which were influential and found their fulfillment in totalitarian systems. A. He was born from a peasant stock, by tradition prepared to carry a heavy load of work with persistency. B. He was baptized in the Catholic Church, an institution well known to have totalitarian orientations, and which up to this day, in principle, proclaims authority over all the Catholics in the world. Having absorbed that totalitarian orientation from childhood, which applies also to Mussolini, Stalin, etc., it was simple for those so trained to switch to state totalitarianism, where such leaders could find a Lebensraum for themselves as individuals, thus enhancing their own egos and incidentally filling their pockets. No one who has actually studied the public appearances of various totalitarian Führers can miss the utter similarity between their reactions and the reactions to the mobs of the mobs to them. They act like little gods on wheels, and the mobs react with unreasoned, blind, fanatical subjection, which the Führers and their aides know how to manufacture. See, Hitler was born into Austrian bureaucracy, one of the most inefficient, dishonest, hypocritical, etc. bureaucracies in the world, permeated with the Habsburg motto, divide et impera. The older Schicklgruber wanted his son also to become a Habsburg bureaucrat. Schicklgruber Jr. had a natural repulsion for them, and so deliberately boycotted any education to disqualify himself for such a fate. This lack of education ostracized him from the class of so-called intelligentsia, to which a Habsburg bureaucrat eventually belonged. Through living necessities, he had to become a plain labor hand, yet because of his paranoia tendencies, delusions of grandeur, based on unhealthy worship of historical heroes, etc., he was also not acceptable to the plain workers, who are generally sane and do not look at life as a Wagnerian opera. So in reality, he found that he was not acceptable anywhere, belonged nowhere, a misfit everywhere, until he adhered to totalitarianism as a religion, which he and his closest associates modified to suit the Prussian character selected by them as a standard of German perfection to be imposed on the rest of the world. D. When he joined the German army, with its orderly efficiency, etc., he found an ideal for himself as an escape from Habsburg decadence. No matter how he hated the Habsburg polite perfidy, he was too much of an Austrian not to utilize the limit of Habsburg methods. Ultimately, through his combination of methods, he out-Prussianed the Prussians, whose particular arrogant, brutal methods were never approved and often disliked throughout the world and even in Germany. I give these data as partial explanations of how through life and other circumstances the whole life of Hitler, as well as his political program, was based on hate, revenge, and destruction of what he feared and hated as a person, driven by his delusions of persecution and grandeur. It was only natural in his chosen people delusion that he should hate and try to destroy other chosen people. Obviously, there is no place in this world for two or more chosen people. The absurdity of Hitler's ignorant anthropological theories has been definitely established by science and history, and in fact are not taken seriously by many of the informed Nazi leaders themselves. Some such analysis of a few of the more important factors in Hitler's life indicates how his mental illness developed, involving inferiority and persecution complexes, etc., and explains why, for his own comfort, he surrounded himself personally with mostly psychopathological people, although their psychiatric classifications may be different. Very soon, psychiatric treatises will be written on the Jehovah complex of Schicklgruber Jr., etc. Perhaps the following quotations will illustrate how the Jehovah, as recorded in Exodus 19 and 20, is being copied today. Now, therefore, if ye will obey my voice indeed, and keep my covenant, then ye shall be mine own possession from among all peoples, for all the earth is mine, and ye shall be unto me a kingdom of priests, and a holy nation. These are the words which thou shalt speak unto the children of Israel, Nazis. Or, I am Jehovah thy God, who brought thee out of the house of bondage, England. Or, for I, Jehovah thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. Or, an altar of earth thou shalt make unto me, and shalt sacrifice thereon thy burnt offerings, and thy peace offerings, thy sheep and thine oxen, In every place where I record my name, I will come unto thee and will bless thee, etc., etc. These suggestions are given only to indicate how psychiatrists can help future historians. 4. Education for intelligence and democracy. It may become clearer why I speak of a dying Aristotelian two-valued system by giving examples of how this type of evaluation is at the foundation of present-day confusions and terrors. Thus, for instance, the Nazi militant delusion of chosen people given us an excellent illustration of a two-valued either-or orientation. The two-valued semantic twisting of real neutrality is another significant example. This distortion has kept the neutrals and terrors disorganizing their national and political life to the point of complete collapse, which today is a historical fact. The Nazi two-valued evaluation of neutrality was either be really neutral and endorse the fight for the Nazis, or be not really neutral and not help them. According to this orientation, a really neutral Belgium, Holland, Denmark, Norway, etc. should fight against England, France, etc. to prove that they are really neutral. A similar analysis applies to the aggression of China against Japan, Czechoslovakia against Germany, Poland against Germany, Poland against Russia, Finland against Russia, Greece against Italy, etc., and so on endlessly, which shows only the pathological applications of the two-valued either-or patterns in action. This analysis applies also to the First World War and the war guilt. In a non-Aristotelian orientation, we ask for actual facts and do not accept mere verbalism. Who invaded whom? The historical facts are simple. We know by now who invaded whom, and never mind verbal definitions. When analyzed from a non-Aristotelian point of view, such orientation appears pathologically twisted. Yet they produced results, as history shows. It is not accidental that some years ago Hitler, in one of his speeches, took a definite stand for the prevailing Aristotelianism, two-valued orientations, etc., and against modern science, which naturally develops in a non-Aristotelian direction. Quite soon, whole volumes will be written on this subject. Here it is possible only to indicate the main methodological issues involved. Dr. Irving J. Lee, in his article General Semantics and Public Speaking, Quarterly Journal of Speech, December 1940, formulates a fundamental contrast between the types of rhetorics of Aristotle and Hitler and the non-Aristotelian type of communication found in general semantics, which is based on proper evaluation, made possible by thalamocortical integration. We should not make the mistake of fancying that Hitler, etc., or the Mikado are building a new non-Aristotelian system and a future new saner civilization. It is only a rebellion within the old either-or system, a changing from one scheme of selfishness, greed, and force to another cabal of selfishness, greed, and brute force, this time unavoidably lowering human cultural standards by training future generations in pathological abuses of neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms, emasculating and misusing science, etc. A non-Aristotelian system must include considerations of neurosemantic and neurolinguistic environments as environment. Introductions of such new factors necessitate a complete revision of all known doctrines, pet creeds, etc., and make possible the building of a science of man, which under the old Aristotelian conditions was impossible. The tabulation given here indicates some of the many old fictitious factors which have been eliminated as false to facts and destructive, while new constructive factors have been introduced. This by necessity requires the utilization of more adequate methods and techniques by which we can cope with a new world. The new non-Aristotelian types of evaluations are forthcoming in every field of human endeavor, in science and/or life, necessitated by the urgencies of modern conditions. The main problem today is to formulate general methods by which these many separate attempts can be unified into a general system of evaluation which can become communicable to children and, with more difficulty, even to adults. History shows that whenever older methods prove their inefficiency, new methods are produced which meet the new conditions more effectively. But the difficulties involved must first be clearly formulated before methods and techniques can be devised with which we can deal with them more successfully. It seems unnecessary to enlarge on the present-day world tragedies because many excellent volumes have already been written and are continuing to accumulate, psychiatric evaluations included. I must stress, however, that no writer I know has ever understood the depth of the pending transition from the Aristotelian system to an already formulated non-Aristotelian system. This transition is much deeper than the change from merely one Aristotelianism to another. We argue so much today about democracy versus totalitarianism. Democracy presupposes intelligence of the masses. Footnote, Mumford Lewis, Men Must Ask. Harcourt Brace, New York, 1939. Totalitarianism does not to the same degree. But a democracy without intelligence of the masses under modern conditions can be a worse human mess than any dictatorship could be. Footnote, consult, for example, comments of the Supreme Court Justice about the impossibility of justice when juries are made up of individuals of low-grade mentality, etc. Certainly, present-day education, while it may cram students' heads with some data without giving them any adequate methodological synthesis and extensional working methods, does not train in intelligence and how to become adjusted to life, and so does not work toward democracy. Experiments show that even a root can learn a lesson, see page 120, and animals can learn by trial and error. But we humans, after these millions of years, should have learned how to utilize the intelligence which we supposedly have with some predictability, etc., and use it constructively, not destructively, as, for example, the Nazis are doing under the guidance of specialists. In general semantics, we believe that some such things as healthy human intelligence is possible, and so somehow we believe in the eventual possibility of democracy. We work, therefore, at methods which could be embodied even in elementary education to develop the coveted thalamo-cortical integration and so sane intelligence. Naturally, in our work, prevention is the main aim, and this can be accomplished only through education, and as far as the present is concerned, through re-education and retraining of the human nervous system. Section 1. Constructive Suggestions. As far back as 1933, on page 485 of the present book, I drew attention to the human dangers of the abuse of neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms with suggestions for preventative measures. In September 1939, I advanced further constructive suggestions to some leading governments, urging the employment of permanent boards of neuropsychiatrists, psychologicians, and other specialists, to counteract similar dangers in connection with the present world crisis. I received only 2 polite acknowledgments of my letters, but both forewarnings of 1933 and 1939 have been disregarded in practice, even by specialists with known disastrous results. In the meantime, the more far-sighted Nazi government employed a staff of specialists working at methods to disorganize the nervous functioning of their adversaries, which, as facts show, have worked very successfully and devastatingly upon the unlucky citizens whom the short-sighted, unscientific, etc. governments never guided toward the proper use of their nervous system or safeguarded from the abuses. Footnote, Taylor Edmund, The Strategy of Terror. Houghton Mifflin, Boston, 1940. Perhaps at present, 1941, after some irreparable harm has been done, the governments of the world will awaken and realize that the proper functioning of the nervous system of their citizens is in many ways more important than any gun, battleship, or aeroplane, etc. could possibly be, as there must be a Smith 1 behind the gun. No matter who is finally victorious in the present world struggle, no matter which way we look at it, the return to the old conditions is impossible. A complete neurosemantic and neurolinguistic revision is inevitable, and this revision is bound to lead away from Aristotelianism. For this revision, we are preparing the foundations and the formulations of general semantics. Before any lasting adjustments in the future social, economic, political, ethical, etc. fields are accomplished, we have to be able to evaluate properly and talk sense. Otherwise, the situation is hopeless. Obviously, regardless of what the politicians may say, in every country we necessarily have some kind of guidance by the government and executive power, no matter in what direction. Even complete lack of guidance must be considered guidance of some sort, in the direction, say, of rugged individualism, etc., which, if carried to the limit, becomes the unworkable ideal of anarchy. In practical life, such attitudes ultimately engender animal competition instead of human cooperation, and the very opposite of what we consider as the social feeling imperative for democracy. The real question of whether the existing governments are informed enough about human neurological problems, sanity, etc., and are intelligent enough, honest enough, etc., to guide and advise their people constructively and efficiently in constantly emerging neurological situations, such as occur in home and school lives and national and international affairs, etc. Unfortunately, the answer is in the negative. At present, there is no such government I know of. The Nazi government, on the other hand, has mobilized the psychological knowledge available to them for destructive purposes, which must be professionally counteracted by the rest of the governments of the civilized world if sanity is to prevail. Depending on science for more and better killing machines is certainly not the solution for human problems, culture, and civilization. Without being sentimental, in a human civilization, humans matter more than machines or symbols such as a dollar or a pound sterling, a pound of flesh, a scalp, etc., or such verbal generalizations as liberty, equality, etc. The living reactions of Smith 1 are more important than the verbalism of Smith 1, who nevertheless can shake the air with the verbal tricks, as many of us too often do, affecting the nervous system of others. At present, the totalitarians have exploited neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms to their destructive limit, the best they know how, to date. Counteraction, reconstruction, and/or prevention are impossible unless such mechanisms are utilized constructively under the guidance of governmental specialists in the field of anthropology, neuropsychiatry, general semantics, etc., who would understand the language of their fellow workers in related scientific fields, and would be free to devote their entire time and efforts to this task, and to further investigations. Although practically all civilized states employ psychiatrists in their governmental hospitals for mentally ill, these physicians are necessarily preoccupied with their patients and cannot undertake the special duties of the board I suggest. Such a board would require the full time and attention of its members, as they would be called upon for consultation by various other governmental departments such as Interior, State, Labor, Commerce, Health, Army, Navy, etc., and so special studies and coordinating knowledge in related branches of science would be essential. It seems extremely short-sighted in 1941 that governments should employ permanently specialists in chemistry, physics, engineering, etc., other specialists who advise how to eliminate lice from poultry, raise pigs, conserve wildlife, etc., and yet have no permanent consulting board of specialists who would advise how to conserve and prevent the abuse of human nervous systems. Even a chamberlain would have intelligence and/or honesty enough to pass a problem of a magnetic mind to physicists and engineers, and not to party politicians who know nothing about such mechanisms, but would nevertheless be ready to debate politically on the subject. For example, if consulted, such a suggested body of governmental specialists would have studied Mein Kampf and various speeches of Hitler, Goebbels, etc., as a part of their duties long ago, and would have advised their governments and psychopathological people are getting in control of world affairs, and that their words cannot be trusted at all. there would have been no appeasements, etc., and other measures would have been taken to cope with the depth of problems involved. It seems that the suggestions made on page 485, although necessary, are not sufficient at the date of this writing, and the latest suggestions become imperative to safeguard our future. Conclusion. To summarize, under present world conditions, the role of the governments is becoming more and more difficult and important. With all modern complexities, it is impossible for governmental men to be specialists in every field of science, and therefore they must depend on professional experts attached to the government, not only in the fields of chemistry, engineering, physics, agriculture, etc., which they already utilize, but also in anthropology, neuropsychiatry, general semantics, and related professions. Otherwise, the governments will indefinitely play the role of the blind leading the blind. It is unreasonable to wait 10 or 20 years to learn by bitter experience how short-sighted and incompetent our governments have been. Why not utilize some human intelligence, proper evaluation, etc., toward which extensional methods lead and thereby have some predictability? This is definitely an imperative immediate need. We should not delude ourselves. Once the psychopathological misuses of neurosemantic and neurolinguistic mechanisms have been so successfully introduced, they will remain with us unless reconstructive and preventive governmental measures are undertaken by experts at once. The conditions of the world are such today that private scientific undertakings have even professional opinions of scientific societies or international congresses, etc., are bound to be ineffective. Only governmental interests, backing, financing, etc., can organize and enforce a serious movement for sanity, the more so since scientists, physicians, educators, and other professionals do not have the necessary time, money, authority, or even initiative to carry forward concerted plans. We have learned this group wisdom by now in the case of smallpox vaccination, control of epidemics, etc., and I venture to suggest that only such group wisdom will be effective as far as the health of our nervous systems is concerned. In terms of money, certainly it would be economical to spend for preventive and permanent measures an amount even less than the cost of a single aeroplane which is made today and shot down tomorrow. It must be sadly admitted that even professionals, no matter how prominent they may be in their narrow specialties, as individuals or specialized groups, are at present scientifically unequipped to deal with such large and complex problems as the passing from one system of orientation to another, because those whose duty it was to integrate methodologically the vast knowledge at hand have failed. Such conditions can be remedied only by diversified methodological investigations, cooperation, and concerted action of specialists in different fields, which no private undertaking can organize effectively. The reader is referred to page 558, and also to my Science of Man. Footnote, Science of Man, American Journal of Psychiatry, May 1937. There can be little doubt that self-seeking politicians, to cover up their own tracks, will be against such scientific sanity guidance, but enlightened public opinion will sooner or later force the issue to that only possible intelligent solution. The prevalent and constantly increasing general deterioration of human values is an unavoidable consequence of the crippling misuse of neurolinguistic and neurosemantic mechanisms. In general semantics, we are concerned with the sanity of the race, including particularly methods of prevention, eliminating from home, elementary, and higher education inadequate Aristotelian types of evaluation, which too often lead to the unsanity of the race, and building up for the first time a positive theory of sanity as a workable non-Aristotelian system. The task ahead is gigantic if we are to avoid more personal, national, and even international tragedies based on unpredictability, insecurity, fears, anxieties, etc., which are steadily disorganizing the functioning of the human nervous system. Only when we face these facts fearlessly and intelligently may we save for future civilizations whatever there is left to save, and build from the ruins of a dying epoch a new and saner society. I seriously appeal to scientists, educators, medical men, especially psychopathologists, parents, and other forward-looking citizens to investigate and cooperate in urging the government to carry out their duty to guide the people scientifically as suggested here. A non-Aristotelian reorientation is inevitable. The only problem today is when and at what cost. Chicago, March 1941, Alfred Korzybski. Acknowledgements, which you can pause and read. Supplementary bibliography to the second edition, which you can pause on and screenshot. Lists of reprints and monographs. And that concludes the introduction to the second edition.